Pentagon plans to deport Zionists as global financial reset looms. The U.S. military-industrial complex is making serious moves against Zionists, preparing to expel many of them to a Jewish autonomous zone in Syria, Pentagon sources say. While the Pentagon and its allies are quite eager to take on Zionist control, even central bankers in G7 leaders meeting last week in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in Biarritz, France, admit that an economic paradigm shift is needed. These moves are related to talk of a global financial reset that would end Zionist control of privately owned central banks, the source say. A whole suite of establishment bigwigs are all now publicly calling for a financial reset. These include IMF head Christine Lagarde, Russian President Vladimir Putin, Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Rothschild-owned economists, and others. They have all called for replacing the US dollar with a new international currency. Such a currency, almost by definition, would fall out of Zionist control because the interests of the world economy and those of the Zionist-controlled corporate US government are in conflict. The trade war is the front of the global currency reset, Pentagon sources confirmed. US President Donald Trump has been calling the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, Bank of America, Citigroup, and others to gain control for a stance on the trade war, the source say. The cancellation by J.P. Morgan Chase of all credit card debt in Canada, the implosion of Debt Street Bank, the General Electric flood exposure, the yuan devaluation, and the gold-black dollar were all a part of the ongoing horse trading for the new system, they say. However much Trump blusters and makes call, though the numbers make it clear that the new system will take power away from the United States. The United States now accounts for only 10% of the world trade, but over 7% of global GDP, used for US dollars as an anchor currency. According to the Bank of England, this makes it obvious that any global current reset would take huge power away from the US corporations. Trump admitted last week that he might declare a national emergency over the issue because we have a total loss of almost $1 trillion a year for many years. This is the closest any sitting US president has come to publicly declaring bankruptcy. Other Trump statements and actions all point to some existential crisis. He has tried to take over Greenland and its resources, charge allies for full cost of US military base, plus 7% and put tariffs on everything Chinese. All because of this impending default, multiple sources agree. The US military is preparing for the ongoing big changes by putting the Army in overcharge for the military, where the Navy takes over control for the various intelligence agencies, the Pentagon sources say. This means the new head of all US intelligence agencies is former Navy SEAL Vice Admiral Joe Magoo, the new Director of National Intelligence, according to Pentagon sources. Magoo takes over after the firing of not just deep state shell ex-Senator Dan Coats, but also his deputy and former CIA Director John Brennan, CIA Lucky Sue Jordan, they said. The de facto U.S. military government declared war on the Jewish mafia on their saddest day, Tisha B'Av, the sources say. Documents relating to pedophile blackmailer Jeffrey Epstein were unsealed on August 9, and he was suicided on August 10 to fast-track the prosecution of others, since all evidence is now admissible without any court challenge, the Pentagon sources say. The first temple that was destroyed 586 BC, the second temple destroyed in 70 AD, the 12 and 19 expulsion from England, the 14 and 92 expulsion from Spain, and now the termination of Zionism on Tisha B'Av may lead to forced transfer to the Jewish autonomous zone in Russia Far East. as Jews receive karmic justice for the centuries of anti-Gulf perfidy, the Pentagon sources declare. The sources add, Epstein is apparently a military operative who may have been exfiltrated to eradicate Mossad blackmail operations in the West, the Zionist parasites, the mega group AIPAC, and the entire Israeli fifth column. In a victory lap to Centenus and Zionists, Epstein died at 66 years, 6 months, 22 days, at 6 a.m. on Jewish Day of Mourning. The source continued. August 10 is also the 17th birthday of the Department of Defense, which swept Epstein Island with multispectral satellites to prosecute homicidal, pedophilia, and other heinous crimes, they say. The source also say Trump cleverly forced Bibi Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Muslim ban Congresswomen Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, exposing Israel as an oppressive state, fracturing bipartisan support while boosting BDS, the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. Bibi, the 11 September, 11 March war criminal now look like a Trump lackey who may not win re-elections. Trump declaring both Chinese President Xi Jinping and Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to be enemies make it pretty clear that the bankruptcy of the US is leading to both anti-Zionist and anti-Chinese reactions. However, the real problem is not so simple. Bank of England Governor Mark Carney made this clear in a very interesting speech to his fellow central bankers last week. According to Carney, there are deep flaws in the international monetary and financial system, caused largely by a stabilizing asymmetry at the heart of the IMF's, the US dollar. The US now accounts for 10% of the world trade and 15% for world GDP. But the dollar serves as the monetary anchor in countries, accounting for 2/3 of the global GDP and over 70% of the world GDP. Emerging market economies, who are largely excluded from managing of the IMF's, now make up 60% of the global GDP and will account for 75% by 2030, he says. Their exclusion from control of the financial system slowed down economic growth for 5/6 of the world economy. Carney also takes aim at current ultra-low interest rate regime, noting, past instances of very low rates have tended to coincide with high-risk events such as war, financial crises, and breaks in monetary regime. Carney concludes by saying, let's end the malign neglect of the IMF's and build a system worthy of the diverse, multipolar global economy that is emerging. The glowing challenges for monetary policy. Interestingly, Carney's analysis came as the U.S. Treasury Department issued the following statement. The Secretary of the Treasury must consider whether countries manipulate the rate of exchange between their currency and the United States dollar for purposes of preventing effective balance of payments, adjustment, or gaining unfair competitive advantage in the international trade. Secretary Mnuchin, under the auspices of President Trump, has today determined that China is a currency manipulator. President Trump tweeted, our country has lost, stupidly, trillions of dollars with China over many years. We don't need China, and frankly, we'll be far better off without them. He also tweeted, the question is being asked, why are we paying much more in interest than Germany and certain other countries? The answer, of course, is that the US dollar as it currently exists is not good for the US economy. Carney's proposed solution is to replace the dollar with the Libra, a cryptocurrency controlled by his former cable bosses. However, the real solution, of course, is something your correspondent has been saying for years. The US needs to issue a currency separate from the no longer American UN dollar. A source in Brewing Committee of 13 Bloodlines, who control the old system, says, in the grand scheme of things, We are moving very fast. It is called acceleration in investment banking. The source: a European royal says a future planning agency is being actively considered. It would have a voting structure based on current world reality, not the world that exists after World War II, when the system we now use was set up. He says, the world is like a giant supertanker with so much momentum that turning it around takes a long time, even if there is a new captain who wants to change direction. That is why, even though change is taking place very rapidly by traditional measures, progress seems so slow. Nonetheless, it will be interesting to see what happens on or around the September 21st date. The US corporation has to make payments to international creditors. This writer is not a hedge fund investor, but if he were, he would be betting on volatility this autumn. If the West does not do anything decisive by then, it's a good bet the Asian will move after the 2020 Chinese New Year. And if they do, remember that the Chinese are very cautious, but when they move big.